Hello and welcome to part 3 of my series on online Zoom choirs. In part 1 we looked at how members could set up their devices to get the best musical experience out of online Zoom choirs. In part 2 I explored the limitations of Zoom and answered some of the questions that people have been sending me. We also looked at some other platforms like Facebook and YouTube and how they can be employed in running online rehearsals. In this third part, I've now had 2 weeks experience of running rehearsals on Zoom, about 8 rehearsals I've taken, and I'll be showing my processes and my thoughts and the problems that I've encountered. So this third and longer video will be broken into 4 sections. In the first section, I'll go through the equipment that I've been using to run these rehearsals, but I will also show you the bare minimum equipment that you would require to run effective Zoom rehearsals. In the second section of this video, I'll talk through my preparations, what I do before rehearsals, how I plan them, and how I set members up ready for their rehearsals. In section 3, we'll actually look at a rehearsal, and I'll be giving you some footage of some of the rehearsals that I've been doing over the last 2 weeks and taking you through my process. In the fourth and final section of this video, I will explore some of the thoughts that I've had over the 2 weeks and also show you some of the equipment that your members may have their end. This is quite important, as one of the things I've encountered over the last 2 weeks is members asking for technical help. So I think it's quite important that MDs are aware of what equipment your members might be using out there so you can best support them technically. Let's first go through the equipment that I've been using over the last few weeks, and I'll go through each item and explain what it does and why I've chosen to use it. I'll then finish this section by showing you what the bare minimum is you would require to run these type of rehearsals. By far my biggest piece of equipment, as you can see, is the Yamaha Clavinova, which is in the centre of the picture. At the back you can see my computer screen. That's an iMac that I run Zoom on. To the right is a second monitor that's plugged into the iMac, so I have dual monitor capabilities. Sitting on top of the Clavinova is a computer keyboard that I use to control the iMac. To its left, a little red box with headphones on. That is an Eddie-Roll audio interface. It allows me to interface up to 10 audio channels into my iMac. To the left of that is a small 8-track mixer. And you can see in the background there is a music stand with some headphones on. Far left there is a spare webcam on a camera tripod that allows me to get like a full feature, so I can use it to cut to if I'm standing up and I want to show anything to do with breathing or anything like that to the members of the choir. Finally, on the far right I have a second computer, a small laptop that I use to play backing tracks. My Clavinova I've had for many years now, and it's always been a very trusty beast. I hardwire this into the computer through the mixer, which I'll explain in a minute. The thing I find most useful about the Clavinova is its record function, because I can pre-record the piano parts that I'm going to use. Another vital piece of equipment is your microphone. You can see mine at the back of this picture here. I use an AKG C1000S. It's proved very reliable over the years and produces good quality audio. One of the issues with using your own built-in microphone that your computer might already have is the audio quality is likely to be poor, particularly with music, and of course that is not ideal. I'll talk more about microphones later. Both the microphone and the Clavinova are wired in to the little mixer on top of the Clavinova. This is the little cheap mixer that I have sitting on top of the Clavinova. You'll notice it's an 8-track. At the top of the picture you can see the cables coming in from my various devices. And then along the bottom you can see the numbers 1 to 8 showing the various channels. For channel 1, that's my microphone, my AKG, you can see it coming in at the top. The red control at the very top is the gain. Then you have various EQs, and at the very bottom I can set the level that I want the mic to be. You might notice at the top of channel 7 and 8 there is a red button. That is the phantom power that powers the microphones, as some microphones require phantom power. I don't use channels 2, 3 or 4, but for 5 and 6, that's a stereo channel. That's the line coming in from the Clavinova. So I've taken an audio line out of the Clavinova and into the back of channels 5 and 6. 7 and 8 is another cable that I plug into the small laptop you saw to the right of the original picture. That allows me to play backing tracks or any other tracks that I may have, YouTube videos or whatever I want, without disrupting the main iMac that I use to control Zoom. Of course, all of these channels, the volume can be controlled by the little volume dial, the one that says level, above the number. So I can set channels 7 and 8 slightly quieter, as you can see here in this photo, slightly quieter than channels 5 and 6, which is the clavinova, and I have the microphone turned right up. Finally, along the right hand side, you'll see 4 controls that don't have the numbers at the bottom. They are your levels out. So at the bottom I can control, now I've mixed all of those channels, I can control the final output level. There are also auxiliaries and headphones options that I can use. The output of the mixer is then taken into my Edirol device. This is a 10 input audio interface, but I'm only using input 1. The purpose of this device is to allow me to connect audio devices like my clavinova and the microphone to my Mac, because the Mac itself doesn't have an audio input, so you have to use a box like this that converts the signal. You'll also notice that I have 2 sets of headphones via a splitter plugged in on the right hand side. There's a very good reason for this. It's because when I'm playing my clavinova or the backing tracks, I have the clavinova, the sound switched off, so the sound of the speakers of the clavinova is not going into my room. The problem with leaving the sound up on the clavinova is that it will be picked up by the voice microphone that you saw in the previous shot, and then you end up with it being kind of doubled layered, which is not a good idea. So what I do is I turn the volume of my clavinova off, so it's only going through to the mixing desk, the Edirol on the computer. And the same applies to the backing tracks. So I still need to be able to hear the piano, and I still need to be able to hear the backing tracks, and that's what I use these headphones for. On the right hand side of my clavinova is an old computer monitor I found in the loft. It's plug and play, they just plug straight into the iMac and it functions as a second screen. I believe it's the same on PC. This proved to be really invaluable in Rehearsal because it allows me to put stuff that I'm using on my computer onto the right hand second monitor and leave Zoom open, the main window of Zoom open, on my main iMac. Because of course if you're having to load scores and things, you're going to end up having to minimize the Zoom window. With 2 monitors I don't have to do this. So I can have the Zoom settings open, or the chat room open, or the breakout room open on the right hand monitor, or my score if I'm conducting, and yet still have the main Zoom window open on my main monitor. The final piece of equipment I use is a second webcam that I've got mounted here on a tripod. This is just USB into the back of the computer, and one of the great features of Zoom is if you're using it on computer, if you click the video input at the bottom of the screen, anytime during the meeting you can select any camera you happen to have plugged into your computer at that time. So it allows me during the meeting, during the rehearsal, to toggle between my main webcam and this one at just the touch of a button. Why do I use all the fancy equipment? Well, the answer to that is I want the best audio going out through Zoom to my members. And in order to achieve that, I want the sound of the clavinova, my accompanying instrument, and the backing tracks, if I'm using them, to go straight into the computer. And that's what I need those devices for. What would be the minimum equipment you would require to do an effective Zoom rehearsal if you weren't so worried about audio quality? Well, that would be your accompanying instrument or your backing tracks, plus a good quality microphone. As I said earlier, I would not rely on the microphone that's built into your computer, as it's unlikely to be of good quality. A quick search online and you'll find USB microphones that are very, very good quality and reasonably cheap. And you can purchase those online through music shops and through Amazon. And you literally plug and play. Just like the webcam I showed you, you plug it into the back of your computer, and you may need to install the drivers, but when it's all up and running in Zoom, all you'll need to do is point Zoom to use that microphone rather than your internal one. This is actually a lot easier to do than you would expect. It's in those settings that I showed you in video 1. You can select your microphone that you want to be using in the drop-down menu against where it says microphone. During the meeting, you can also change this. If you've already set up a meeting and you're running and you realize you're using the wrong microphone, next to the little mute button, there is usually an arrow pointing up. And if you click on that, it will produce the audio menu, and you can then select the USB microphone that you want to use. Now, when you have a good quality USB microphone, you can then play your instrument live into your room and play the backing tracks live into your room, and the microphone will pick that up as well as your voice. You've got to be careful on levels and bear in mind that doing it this way will not produce the best quality sound, but it is certainly the cheapest way of doing it with a minimal amount of equipment. In the second part of this video, I'll be explaining the preparation that I did before the very first rehearsal. So the first thing I did was to digitise all my scores, the scores that I was going to be using in the rehearsals. I did this by scanning them in to my computer and changing them into PDFs. Now if you don't have a scanner, you can use the photo app on your phone, or there are other apps you can download that will allow you to scan them and turn them into PDFs. Now I did this for 3 reasons. The first reason is for page turning. I have the physical scores, but to page turn and conduct and play when I'm used to having an accompanist is quite impossible. So I decided to scan them so I could have them on the screen. That way when I'm getting to a page turn, I could just hit the down arrow and it will change the page for me. The second reason why I digitised all my scores was so it would raise my eyes up to the webcam. If the music is on the screen, either this screen or more usually I put it on my second screen, it means my eyes are at least up. And with the choir members in front of me, the choir will perceive it that I'm looking at them when I'm really looking at the music. From an audience point of view, of course, the choir members, it's good for them to think that their MD is engaging with them. So it means the eyes are up, which is a good feature. The third reason is because if they are digitised on your computer, you can then screen share your computer with the members of your choir. What screen sharing does is it transmits the picture of your computer to your members rather than the webcam. So rather than just showing the webcam of you, it will show your desktop instead. And that way you can load the PDF, and you might want to address a certain concern you had in a score. Maybe bar 4 needs a certain breath or something like that. Or there are bits that you want to annotate. You can therefore show your members the score and they can see exactly what you're talking about. It's far better to do it that way than just hold up music and point to various bars, because that isn't as easy to see across the internet. So they're the 3 reasons why I digitised the scores. The second thing I did was to create backing tracks for all of the pieces that I was going to be playing or using. I could still play them live and use the page turning as previously mentioned, but it's nice to have the backing tracks ready so your hands are free and you can focus on that, particularly if, like me, you're used to having an accompanist in your choirs. So the backing tracks, I'd already really created them, because part of my job with all of my choirs, apart from conducting them, is to create backing tracks, rehearsal tracks, should I say, for each voice for every piece. So every single piece has a sung rehearsal track with the accompaniment on that members can download from our secure members area. Now I'm quite lucky that I live with a soprano, so she was able to record the soprano and alto rehearsal tracks, and I recorded the tenor and bass ones. That means that with every single piece, there is a track for every single voice and it's sung with the accompaniment. I had these all preloaded with the piano, just the basic piano accompaniments, into my laptop. So that was part of the preparation, having those all preloaded. That way I knew that at the drop of a mouse, I could play the soprano part to one of our songs, let's say Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. I could play the soprano part into the system so they could hear just the soprano part. I could play just the tenor part, or indeed just the piano part. So that was another part of my preparation, making sure I had all the rehearsal tracks and backing tracks ready, preloaded on my laptop so I could play them easily. The next thing I had to consider is how I would invite my members to the choir rehearsal. Now, if you have a choir rehearsal that starts at, say, 7:15, it's a good idea to have what we refer to as a soft start. So that would mean tell them to arrive from 7 for a rehearsal at 7:15. That quarter of an hour window is quite important, I found. And I'll explain a bit about that later when we get into section 3 of this video. So how do you invite your members? Well, with the choirs that I conduct, they receive a weekly newsletter that we use MailChimp to bulk email out to the choir. MailChimp is an online platform that allows you to send emails en masse, and people can subscribe to it. So all my members have subscribed to that, and I could send out a bulk email that told them, turn up at this day at 7 o'clock, ready for 7:15. Now within Zoom, of course, you have to prepare the meeting. There are options to schedule a meeting in Zoom, and there are other videos out there that you can watch to find out how to do that. Scheduling a meeting will give you a code, an ID for that meeting, and it will also provide you with a link that you can copy into an email and send out, much as I showed in the first video that I created. I think from a security point of view, there is the option of using your personal ID within Zoom. Now, there's been a lot of said recently about the security of Zoom, and one feature that's really important is not to use your personal ID, because that means that anyone effectively that has that personal ID can access any of your personal meetings. It's far better to create a unique ID, and there is information on the Zoom website about how to do that. So when you have scheduled your meeting, you can send the invite and copy it into the email that you're going to send out, or as in my case, into the newsletter that went out. Now, there is the facility within Zoom to set up a waiting room. So say, for example, you have said to your members that the rehearsal is going to start at 7:15, but start arriving from 7. You might not be ready to start at 7. So the waiting room, if that feature is ticked when you set up the meeting, they will receive like a holding screen. And when you eventually get through to the meeting and you start the meeting, you'll have to let them in from that waiting room. It's a good feature. The only problem with it is you've got to keep an eye on the waiting room, which will be down in the members tab if you're using a computer, throughout your rehearsal, just in case somebody turns up late, because otherwise they'll just be stuck there until you let them in. You can set a ping. Zoom will make a ping when anyone tries to join the meeting and ends up in the waiting room, so that can be a useful way around that. But just bear that in mind. Some of your members may actually live in the same house as other members. Now, I noticed this. We have a couple of married couples in my choirs, and they chose to sit in front of the same device. So they had their computer and both of them sat in front of the same computer. That's great. However, if they choose to be on different devices, let's say one was on a computer and one is on an iPad or something, it is really important that they do not sit in the same room when they join the meeting. The reason for that is it creates a feedback loop and you end up with a horrible howling sound. So it's really important, if you have two members in the same house that are joining a meeting, make sure that they're not in the same room. The final thing I did, let's say again that our rehearsal is starting at 7:15 and I know members are going to be arriving at 7, is I do a test. Around about 6:45, I would get someone that I can use, so I can send start the meeting, and I can test all the equipment with them on the other end. So they can come into the meeting before I start it officially, and I can make sure that the volume is the correct level. They can hear the clavinova, they can hear the backing tracks. It's really important that you test, so that way that you're not dealing with technical issues your end after the rehearsal has started. In this third section of the video, I'm going to go through a complete rehearsal and show you how I structure it and how I organise it. I'll also give some examples from my recent rehearsals that I've conducted on Zoom. Before I get into that though, I think it's important to make you aware that I pay for Zoom. I don't use the free version anymore. Since I've been rehearsing, I pay for the first level of the subscription service. Now, with the free version, you can only do meetings of up to 40 minutes with 3 people or more before the meeting shuts. With the paid version, you can do much longer meetings. Also, some of the other features I believe are not available on the free version, so just bear that in mind. So the first thing I do after I've done my test that I mentioned in the previous section is I start the meeting at 7 o'clock, and I'm aware that it's a soft opening, so members will start arriving from 7 and ready to start at 7:15. So what do I use those 15 minutes for, and why do I have them? Well, first, it allows the members to arrive gradually and to start socialising, and it's a great opportunity for them to test out the kit and make sure that they can be heard and seen, and that they can see and hear each other. In those 15 minutes, I'm able to address any technical concerns that they may have or questions that may be coming up. I also use those 15 minutes to set up what are called breakout rooms. Now, breakout rooms are like mini conferences that you can eventually send your members to, and they can then interact within that room, and when you want, you can then call them back to the main Zoom rehearsal. Now, in those 15 minutes, I set up 4 breakout rooms. In my first rehearsal, I certainly set up 4 breakout rooms. I had a soprano one, an alto one, a tenor, and a bass rehearsal room. So they're kind of like breakout rehearsal rooms, I guess you could say. And I was doing this on my second screen. So as members were arriving, I was seeing them and I was allocating them ahead of time to those rooms. So when the rooms eventually open and you press the open button, they would get an invite to go to the correct room. Now, it's useful in these 15 minutes because you might find that you don't recognise all your members or can't remember where they sit in your physical rehearsal. So it's a great opportunity to say, okay, which section are you in? And they can then say soprano, and then you can make sure they're allocated to the correct room. So those 15 minutes to start with are to allow members to arrive, to start socialising, to address any technical concerns or questions that they may have that you can then help them with, and also for me to set out the breakout rooms or set up the breakout rooms. Now, for the first rehearsal, I did use those sectional divisions for the breakout rooms. But what I've started doing is for subsequent rehearsals, I've alternated doing breakout rooms according to section, so soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and random breakout rooms. Now, when you create a breakout room, Zoom will ask you, do you want to manually attribute a member to a breakout room, or do you want it to be done automatically? So if you're doing sectional breakout rooms, you're going to need to do it manually in those 15 minutes when you start. If you do it automatically, it will just randomly assign people to the breakout rooms. It will tell you if you've got 50 people and you want 10 per room, it will tell you obviously how many rooms you need, and it will do it all for you automatically. So I've alternated the two. In my first rehearsal, I do a sectional breakout room system. In the second rehearsal, I do a random one. That really allows people to socialise. So in the social part of the rehearsal, which I tend to put in the middle of my schedule, I can send them to those rooms and they can socialise, and they get to meet people that they might otherwise not usually talk to in a rehearsal. So then it comes to the start of the rehearsal. The first thing I do is I talk to them about some of the technology and some of the tech that they're going to have to handle when they are engaging in the Zoom choir rehearsal. Of course, you would definitely want to do this for your first ever rehearsal, but you may like to remind members of it in subsequent rehearsals. So I let them experiment with muting their volume so they can turn their microphone off, and I allow them to experiment with muting their video so they know how to turn their video off and they know how to turn their audio off. I also talk to them about if they use a computer, how they can use the space bar when they're muted, when their microphone's muted, like walkie-talkie, to be able to do talkback. I also explain that I, as a host, I can mute everybody, which I do for most of the rehearsal, and that if they need to contact me in emergency, they can press their space bar or their unmute button if they're using a tablet or a phone. So I explain all of that in the very first part of the rehearsal. I also explain the difference between speaker view and gallery view. Speaker view being where you only see the loudest person on your screen, so whoever's talking should appear on your screen and fill the whole thing. And gallery view is where you see the square matrix of all the members. Do bear in mind that if you have a high number of members joining, you might not all see them on one screen. You might have to swipe right or left if they're in gallery view, or if you're on a computer, it will tell you screen 2 of 3. So just be aware that you might not see everybody at once. The other functions that I talk about is chat and how to chat to one another. I show them by giving a demonstration how to chat using the chat function so they can chat to each other, and also how to send private messages so they message just one member. I explain that when I am going to mute them all, if they have any problems and they need to talk to me, they can obviously press their spacebar to talk to me. But if for some reason they can't turn their mute off, that they might like to send me a message through the chat. And again, I have the chat open on my second screen, so throughout the whole rehearsal, I can see the chat function and I can see the chat coming in. I also go through the original audio feature of Zoom, which I detailed in my very, very first video in the advanced audio settings. Of course, this is only applicable to people that are using computers, not people that are using iPads or iPhones or tablets. So do watch that other video, the first video I created, to find out more about the original audio feature. But I usually use this point of the rehearsal to explain to the members how to turn that on. Finally, I try to ascertain how many people I've got on computers and how many people I've got using some type of tablet device. I'll explain more about the differences and what you should try to convey to your members in the final section of this video. We do mute, and I mentioned this earlier when we first started, when we do mute our microphones, obviously I'm not going to be hearing you. So if you start talking, say for example you've got a problem, I'm not going to hear it. And if I'm not hearing you or people are not hearing you, double check to see whether you're muted first. What you can do is, again, down the bottom of the screen, there is a chat facility. And if you click on chat, I've already explained this a little bit when we started, but the way the chat works, anyone can type a message into chat. So if you type it, you'll notice where it says to, mine is currently selected everyone. So Joe has just said hello everyone, and I'm going to say hello Joe. And it's gone to everyone because I've got everyone selected. However, I'm going to send just Chris a message. So I've selected now Chris, and I'm going to say hi Chris. Watch out for the altos. Watch out for the altos. There we go. So that's gone to just Chris. He will be able to see that, and it will say on his chat feed, he'll see all of the rest of them, but he'll see one that says privately. So that means that if you want to talk to someone while I'm gassing or whatever, you can use it there. Also, report any problems. Something else I mentioned at the start to some of you before you joined is if you get chucked out of a meeting, just go back to the link I sent out or Mary sent out, and you can join it. You can join that meeting, come back to the meeting. So if you get chucked out, if you want to go for a comfort break or something, you could always stop your webcam by pressing the stop button, stop video down in the bottom left-hand side. Now in that first rehearsal, that text speak is usually quite long, I find, and I'd imagine repeating elements of it in subsequent rehearsals. However, as members become more and more familiar using Zoom, I'd imagine that eventually it will become totally redundant. I usually use this point in the first rehearsal to demonstrate the elephant in the room, and that of course is latency. I ask members whether any of them have had a birthday recently, and invariably they have. And then I ask them to leave their microphones on, and I leave them unmuted. And of course, chaos ensues. Here is an example. Yeah, I'm going to leave it unmuted so you can hear the carnage. All right? So here you goes. Wrong pedal. I forgot this thing has 3 pedals. It's not automatic. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Well, that was.
That's funny.
That's a real thing.
Usually at this point I turn around and say you should really consider joining a choir. At this point in the rehearsal, I'd usually do the choir warm-up. Now I'm thinking that going forward from here, I may actually record some warm-ups onto a video and upload it to the choir's YouTube channel. So that way members can watch that before joining the meeting, the Zoom choir, and can come prepared. Following the warm-up, I'll then get into the main body of the rehearsal. Now, just like in a normal person-to-person rehearsal, in a Zoom rehearsal, the content and structure is going to be a very personal thing to every musical director. What I find is that the tone of the rehearsal is set by whether we're learning new music or going over old ground. In this next video, you'll see me using screen sharing to teach a new part of a piece that the choir hasn't done yet. This is the medley from Hair, and you'll hear a backing track being used in the background to demonstrate the piece as well. On that note, we now have 63 people. This is incredibly exciting. I'm going to mute you all, so you're all going to go quiet, but I will give you the permission to be able to unmute yourself, so you'll be able to do that if you need to. Here you go. So hopefully all you'll be able to hear is me. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the first song in Hair. So that's a song that we actually haven't learnt yet. We haven't done any work on it. So let me just bring that up. I'll just show you the kind of music. In fact, I won't do I'll do the music first. So if I bring up my screen share, desktop 2, let's just see. So with the music on the screen here, these first 4 bars, actually, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see my music? Excellent, most of you can, great. So those first 4 bars there, they repeat 4 times in the backing track that I'm about to use, and then it launches into bar 5. Now this is actually a scan of the music that I use up front, so you can see all my notes to myself as well. You'll notice when we get there in bar 5 and bar 6, the sopranos and altos divide. We're not actually going to do those. We're only going to do soprano one part. So I'd always planned for that only to be a soprano one part, so we can miss out the middle notes, the C's going through there. The altos, you're on the lower part. Looking at the second page, we have the tenors and basses at the bottom into page 3, singing together, and then they divide as they go through here, through bars 12, 13 area. In 14, they continue to divide, singing the tune. Then in 15, we have that division again for the sopranos and altos, but again, we're not going to do the soprano divide, just the top bits. And that applies to whenever there are 3 notes in the soprano-alto part in this first song. Just be aware that it's only going to be soprano 1 that I'm going to be playing. We'll have a look at up to bar 19 to get us started, I think. So if I stop sharing, and what I shall do next is I'm going to play you the backing track. I'm going to play you a recording so you can hear what that first song sounds like. Chloe, you'll need your headphones, which are over there, just so you can get an idea of what that first song sounds like. So just bring it up. Sorry, I've just got to swap computers. There we go. So there's a lot of strange noises at the beginning because they add in all the screaming and shouting that we don't have to do unless you really fancy it. So here goes. Hopefully you should hear this. Can we all hear that? So here's your looping 4 bars. Lots of hippie noises and celebrations, no less. Bar 5. In this next video, the choir is learning to sing my arrangement of Lou Reed's Perfect Day. Now the choir are already quite familiar with this. You'll notice that I'm using screen sharing again, but this time I use the annotation tool within Zoom to draw the choir's attention to some of the bits that I want to discuss, including performance directions and breathing. Back to bar 5, just a perfect day, basses first, and 1. Just a perfect day. Feed animals in the zoo. Then later a movie too, and then home. And as long as you come off on the right time basses there, what you can do is you can begin to press the word home, because you'll notice in the piano part there is this written. We have in the piano part a, oh, don't want one of those. Sorry, excuse me a second. Free draw, where's free draw? There we go. We have a crescendo written. And I didn't write that in the bass part, but really you want a little crescendo in there as well, because that'll sound nice. So it's tenors, isn't it? Sorry, tenors, not basses. So then later a movie too, and then home. So you can just allow that to warm as it goes through before everyone comes in with, oh, it's such a perfect day. Now, when we need to teach the musical phrases or parts to our members, we can do this in a variety of ways. In this next video, you'll hear me playing the clavinova and singing over the top to teach the parts. What we'll do, you don't need those on anymore, is I just want to have a look at that opening bit. So the hair, we have the rhythm, hair, 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 and it sounds like this. Just turn my piano up. Can we all hear the piano? Is that okay? Good stuff, right. So sopranos, you're just going to do bar 5. Just listen to Chloe do it. 2, 3, 4. Sopranos, want to have a go at that? 2, 3, 4. And the altos, you'll be taking the lower note of the 3, because remember we're not doing the second soprano parts. Those. 2, 3, and. Try it. 2, 3, and. Tenors, they trust you with 2 notes. So typical tenor parts. Oh dear. Try it. 2, 3, and. Basses, you get one better than the tenors. You get to sing 3 notes. Should we try it? 2, 3, 4. Now, usually when I'm teaching new music to the choir, what I will do is I'll run through each line. So I'll teach the soprano line, the alto line, the tenor line, and the bass line individually. And of course on Zoom, with them muted, you can get them to sing those back to you, and they can hopefully self-monitor with thumbs up, thumbs down if they need more help, or talk to you through the chat. With new pieces, I usually follow that by singing two lines against one another. For example, I might sing the bass line and Chloe might sing the alto line, and then I'll do the tenor and she'll do the soprano. If I don't have Chloe available, I can always use those sung rehearsal tracks, so I could play the soprano one that I pre-recorded and I could sing one of the tenor or bass parts against them. All on the same notes. 1, 2, 3, and... I'll sing tenor, Chloe will sing alto now. Here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that sounds quite exciting. You'll notice that bar 15 for the sopranos and altos, it's basically what you've just been doing. And you get exactly the same on page 6 in bar 34. And then, just in case you didn't know it by that time, bar 38 as well. So you get that quite a few times. Right, now this next bit... Of course, sometimes you'll want to have your hands free. So the easiest way to do this is to sing to an instrumental backing track. In this next example, you'll hear us doing just that.
Clearly, greasy, greasy, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxen, waxen, nodded, polka dotted, twisted, beaded, braided, powdered, floured, and confetted, wrangled, tangled, spangled, and spaghetti.
As mentioned in section 2 of this video, as part of my preparation, I sorted out all my rehearsal tracks, my sung rehearsal tracks that I had created previously, and I put them on my second computer, my laptop, so I could play them and use them. So this means that if I want, I can draw upon those, and I can, for example, have the soprano rehearsal track with Chloe's voice on because she's previously recorded, and I can play that as the accompaniment going out to the choir. This again frees my hands up so I can conduct, but it also means I can sing over the top of it. And it's really useful if Chloe's not around for that part of the rehearsal. Here is an example.
Till I hear you speak, I listen, stay by my side, guide me. Until my soul was weak, forgive me, enter as last master.
And
I want is freedom, a world with no more night, and you always beside me, to hold me and to hide.
now throughout your rehearsal, you're going to want to check in with your members to find out how they're doing and if there's any bits that they're struggling with. I find simple questions that promote thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways from your members saves unmuting them is an easy way of getting a quick response. That said, you are going to want to unmute them every so often to check in more detail. What I find the best procedure is to ask them before you've unmuted them, give them 30 seconds to think of any parts that they might want to explore in further detail or to identify any parts they're struggling with. When you've then unmuted them, you can ask your sopranos, for example, are there any bars you'd like me to go over again? And work down the whole choir, altos, tenors, basses, making a note of any parts that they've identified. Following that, mute them again, and of course you can explore those bits that they have identified using the methods I've already shown you in the previous examples. Another useful feature of Zoom, of course, is the chat function that we've already looked at. Members can be making notes and sending you messages throughout the rehearsal, identifying parts that they're struggling with or bits they'd like to go over again. Of course, individual members could sing to you if they chose to, if they wanted to check that they're getting a line right. They can't sing together because of the latency issue, as we've already explored, but they could unmute themselves either by touch to speak or by just normally unmuting themselves and sing to you if they wanted to. You might find that some people are rather reluctant to do this, of course, because that will be broadcast to the whole choir. I guess you could use breakout rooms to help you with that and maybe have a solitary breakout room that you could go to with a member who wanted to explore just one part. You've just got to think very carefully about what the rest of the choir could be doing at that point in time. In fact, this can actually work to your favour because, of course, choirs are social organisations and your members will want to socialise. So sometimes leaving them to just socialise, to chat and explore the features of Zoom at their leisure can be a good thing. At some point during the rehearsal, usually about halfway through, I open the breakout rooms. Now remember I set those up during the soft start. So sometimes I'll set those up to be sectional breakout rooms where they can go and chat in sections like all the sopranos, or sometimes it will be random depending on how I set it up that week. So at this point I would usually open the breakout rooms, at which point the members would receive an invite and they can go off and explore the rooms. That gives me a chance to have a break, and it also gives me a chance to go and visit the various sections and chat to them individually. So that's what I would do at the halfway point. Before sending your members to breakout rooms, it's an idea to tell them a rough time that you're going to reconvene the rehearsal. That way, if anybody wants to leave their computer, they can be back in time ready for the second half. When you're ready to shut the breakout rooms, if you go to the breakout room tab, you can just click close breakout rooms, and that will give the members in the breakout rooms about a minute to get back to the main screen. If they don't do that via their own volition, the breakout room will shut and they'll be brought back to the main screen anyway. For the second half of the rehearsal, you're probably going to follow a plan very similar to the first half, and I use obviously the same techniques that I've already outlined here. When I get to the end of the rehearsal, you might have a chairman that wants to give notices, or you might want to give notices yourself. The best thing to do is to unmute the chairman so they can give their notices and then mute them afterwards while you give your final goodbyes. I usually like to tell the choir what I'm going to be doing the following week and any prep work that I'd like them to do in the meantime. And at the very end, I usually unmute everybody and say that I'm going to leave the Zoom choir open for the next half an hour or so, and if people want to chat, they can do. I then usually mute myself and mute my video and leave the room and go on and get on with something else. That way your members can leave as they wish and socialise and chat before they do so. In the final section of this video, I'll give you some thoughts and observations from my experience over the last few weeks. My first one is that the process of running an online Zoom choir, I found it absolutely exhausting. More exhausting than just running normal rehearsals where you're in the same room as your choir. I'm not sure why this is. Maybe it's to do with the new medium and having to think on your feet all the time, but certainly I was very aware of being very tired afterwards and enjoyed the break in the middle of the rehearsal. The next thing is that I think you can't underestimate how important it is that the choir are socialising and chatting to one another. This seems to be as important as the actual musical content, and I think it's well worth having that break in the middle where the choir can socialise and chat to one another and maintain some sense of normality. The third observation is the need for technical support. I found myself being bombarded, having 4 choirs, with emails from various members having various problems with the technology and getting used to using Zoom. This in itself can be quite draining. What I suggest is you see whether there is anybody within your groups who is proficient at using Zoom and sort of set up a technical support team that can aid you, and you can send people that are struggling too. So in other words, if someone is struggling, rather than dealing with it yourself, maybe set up a tech support team that can help that person. Of all of the features of Zoom, I found the most invaluable one as an MD is the mute all function. In my first rehearsal, I wasn't aware that that was a feature, and I was having to go through and mute people because your members will not be used to how conferencing works and will often talk over the top of one another. So the mute all function is one of the best features of Zoom I found and the most useful. In terms of things that I found essential for my practice is the use of backing tracks. Often I'm certainly not used to accompanying the choir because my choirs have accompanists. So I found that my mind would be elsewhere if I was trying to play and sing and direct at the same time. Possibly that's what led to me to being so tired. So I found that using rehearsal tracks and backing tracks to be essential for me to be able to think and keep focused on what I should be doing rather than just playing. You may not be aware of it, but Zoom will actually record your rehearsal. So what I do is I set up the rehearsal beforehand to record. You can do that in the meetings settings. If you've forgotten to do that, on a computer down at the bottom of the screen on the taskbar of Zoom, you'll find that there is a record feature. Your members will be informed that the rehearsals were being recorded, and I think out of courtesy you should tell them as well. Why record your rehearsal? Well, it's useful for any members that are not on Zoom or not willing to use Zoom to be able to watch the rehearsal back after it's taken place. Plus, members, of course, may want to go over bits of the rehearsal that they struggled with. What I've been doing is I've been editing the video that Zoom generates after the rehearsal, and I've been uploading that to the choir's YouTube channel, but I've been making it an unlisted video. That means that no one on YouTube will be able to find it unless they have the link. I then post that link to the members via email. I've been thinking about the use of breakout rooms. You may remember that I organise them either randomly, getting the computer to choose members for the rooms, or I do it according to voice type. With rooms organised according to voice type, this opens the opportunity for sectionals. Maybe in your choir, in each voice, there is one strong person that could take a sectional in the breakout rooms. With my choirs, and having Chloe here, I could send her on another device, in another room of course, to go into the soprano room and then move to the alto room while I work with the tenors and basses. So you could use the breakout rooms to help smaller groups and work on specific voice problems. Since doing my first video on Zoom, I found these extra audio settings which can be useful. Go through to Preferences, and as previously mentioned, make sure that your mic is not set to auto adjust, but you actually set the levels yourself. Make sure you have original audio ticked, and then there are these three settings. I set the first two to disabled and the final one to auto, and it seems to produce better quality audio overall. And finally, I'm going to look at some of the devices that your members may be using to access Zoom. Here is an iPad, and this is what Zoom looks like on the iPad. At the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see that there is the settings. If you go through to Meeting Settings, you can set where the audio is coming from, the top menu. I like it to be Use Internet, because it seems to get better quality again. Always mute my microphone means that when you join a meeting, your microphone will be initially muted. The same applies to always turn off my video. When you join a meeting, your video will be muted until you unmute it. A very important setting can be found down near the bottom. Always show meeting controls. What this means is that when you're in a meeting, rather than having to tap the screen to get the taskbars to appear, they will always be at the top and bottom. I find this really useful because that way you can access the features quickly. When your member using an iPad is ready to join the meeting, they click Join Meeting and they can enter in the code you've sent them, the meeting ID. I've frosted mine out here. You would type the numbers in and then click Join, at which point you join the meeting. And we are now in the meeting. You'll notice at the top of the screen is that taskbar. That taskbar will disappear unless the screen is touched, unless you have set that setting in the preferences, the meeting preferences that I said about always showing the taskbar. Notice I'm unmuting myself, I'm stopping my video. When my video is running, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the right circle with a picture of the camera that will change which camera I'm using. So if someone has got their wrong camera set, direct them to push that button and it will change to the front camera. There's the Participants tab where you can see who's taking part in the meeting. And to the right of it, there is the More tab, the three dots. Notice you can put up your thumbs, you can access chat here. And in chat, you can chat to everybody. You can see it says send to everybody. You can also chat to an individual here. Let's go back to the More tab. You can claim host, and there are those meeting settings again. These are the same meeting settings as we've seen before. Notice at the top, always show meeting controls. If you turn that off, look what happens to the taskbar. It disappears and it can only be accessed by tapping the screen, which I find quite annoying. There you go, I'm tapping the screen. Then it appears again. Going through to those meeting settings, you can make sure that it's set up so it is always at the top of the screen. There it is, top control. Now that taskbar at the top will always stay there. I find this leads to less confusion. And finally, for the iPad tour, there is Gallery View. Notice on the left-hand side there are two circles, Switch Camera, which we've already talked about, and Switch to Gallery View. That will produce this, which is, of course, everybody in the meeting. Let's have a look at what Zoom looks like on an iPhone. Here is the Zoom app. Meetings are along the bottom, and Contacts, and Settings. Going into the meeting settings, likewise you can join, as we've already seen, the different types of audio. I usually set it to use internet. This is exactly the same as the iPad. Always mute microphone. Well, obviously when you go into a meeting, it will mean that you're muted to start with. Same with video. And there is that magic control. Always show meeting controls. I like to have that selected, so that way the meeting controls are always on the screen. Here are the other controls that you can see just for your information. Back to the main screen. When the choir member using the iPhone wishes to join the meeting, they can click the second icon in Join, enter the code that you've given them at the top, the ID, and also use these buttons to select whether they want to start with or without audio. They then get taken through to the meeting when they join. I've turned my phone landscape as it gives a better view. Notice that I'm muted at the bottom left at the moment. These controls are always displayed because of that setting about always display meeting controls. I can also stop the video if I choose to by clicking the Stop Video button. Unmuting myself, muting myself, unmuting, and starting the video. If you swipe left, you come to this screen, which will mute you and your video. You then have to tap to speak or swipe back. Let's try that again. Swiping left, and the microphone and video is now muted. If I wanted to speak, I can tap, so this is the tap to talk, but bear in mind my video is stopped, and I can release that to go back into the muted mode. There it is again, and releasing. Swiping back right to the main screen. Swiping in the other direction will get gallery view if there's more than one participant. The Share Content button in the middle brings up this menu, allowing you to share various aspects of your phone. In the participant screen, you can see along the bottom, chat, invite, mute, and unmute all. This is because I'm the host. So I can click the chat tab and chat to everybody. Or I could select where it says everyone and select an individual to talk to. The More button reveals this, record to cloud, meeting settings, and the clapping, thumbs up, and the meeting settings. Remember, these will be different if you are the host or if you are a participant. There was the always show meeting controls, that all important one that I like. Without it, this is what happens when you release the screen. The menus disappear. With it selected, they would always be there. For members that are not used to using their phones and their tablets for this device, I find it really important that they can have the menus always on screen, as it saves confusion. Finally, at the top right hand side, there is the End button, the red end. That brings up this menu that allows you to either leave the meeting or, if you are the host, to end it. So that brings me to the end of this rather long video. That last section I think is quite important because members will be approaching your choir with different devices, some using computers, some using iPads, some using their iPhones, some using other types of phones and devices or tablets. I'm not familiar with the devices that I haven't spoken about, so I wasn't able to include them in this video. I'm sure other people will be generating videos showing you how to use those though. It's important to know and be familiar with these various devices and how Zoom appears, because you're often going to get members asking you questions. For example, in my first rehearsal, I had a member that was saying that they couldn't access gallery view. I ascertained that they were on an iPad, so I was able to say that there should be a button around about here on your screen that says Gallery View. I then had another member say that they couldn't access Gallery View and they were on an iPhone. I'd already looked into this, so I was able to say you just need to swipe in the other direction and you'll be able to access Gallery View. So with that in mind, I think you are going to be asked questions. It's worth familiarising yourself with all the devices. I really hope this video has been useful to you, all the MDs out there that are trying to set up Zoom choirs. It would never be as good as a choir in person, but in these difficult times we have to take extreme measures, and this is the best technology that I've found through my research. Take care of each other, look after each other, keep smiling and keep singing.